Hello, Brian, and welcome to a special edition of Japan by River Cruise. Special because we are making it. I am Bobby Judo.
Hello, I'm Ollie Horn. What? Look at this! Against all odds, we are back in your podcast feed.
Yeah, we've discussed this before on the show, but we are not keeping to our monthly schedule. We apologize. We hope that this very special episode will go a small way to make up for it.
Yeah, and now I've planted my ass in one place for the time being. I feel generally less profoundly sad, and Bobby has stopped tending to his massive outdoor deck so often. We should be back on track. So thanks to those who got in touch saying, where the hell is the podcast? It's right here. Enjoy it right now.
If you happen to be new to the show, we are an industry podcast about the Japanese river cruise industry, all things Japanese river cruises, and we usually focus our discussions on topics such as Japanese river cruises.
Yes, but given the obvious organic SEO advantages of releasing a show in July 2022 with the title, Why Was Abe Assassinated?, we thought we'd stop worrying about river cruises and start worrying about the more interesting questions like, was it actually ulcerative colitis that was the ultimate cause of ex-Prime Minister Abe's death?
Before we get started, Japan was not the only country to have lost a prime minister. Ollie, anything you wanted to say about what's going on in your neck of the woods?
No, everything's absolutely fine, by the way. Don't worry about us. Everything's cool. We've got everything under control.
Okay. So for our guest tonight, we have a good friend of the show and author of the forthcoming cynical opportunistic cash grab, hoping to capitalize on the success of Tokyo Vice, author and investigative journalist, Jake Adelstein. Jake, how you doing?
It's a pleasure to be here, Bobby, back on the show. Yes, Tokyo Private Eye, the cash grab sequel to Tokyo Vice, should be on your bookshelves next year in French first, because that's how I roll. It is great to be back here discussing the demise of Prime Minister Abe months after it happened. But, we've had time to look at this coolly and calmly and collectively and
Well, do you know what? That was going to be my first question. We'd planned to record this episode right at the end of July. I mean, I think it was just days before I started my my Fringe run. And then we tried to reschedule and we couldn't. Do you think that this episode and your opinions are going to be different 2 months on? Now you've had a chance to kind of see what's happened.
I just want to say real quick, you said you wanted to do the Death of Abe episode end of July? I've been planning it since last April.
I've been wanting to have that episode since 2007, even before there was this show. But here we are.
Great. All right. Well, so basically, Abe was assassinated at the end of July, right? And we didn't know the motive. We didn't know who the killer was. We didn't really know what was up. Now, it seems that we know all this stuff. So before we get into the weeds, has your opinion changed?
Yes, it's changed because, wow, when he was first assassinated, everybody was kind of like, poor Abe, he's a iconoclast, a divisive figure, but a hero. And then when we find out why he was really assassinated and the reasons he was assassinated and what a ass-kissing pawn he was to the Unification Church, wow, now everybody who didn't like him doesn't like him more. And a lot of people in Japan, I think 70% of the people opposed having a state funeral for him. Mm-hmm. So it makes it a lot easier to say what we really think of him, or for me to say what I really think of him, not that I've ever really held back there.
Well, yeah, no, you've never held back. And I should mention that at any point, Dr. Thomas Baudinet might show up. He's also invited to be on the show just to provide a less, what's a good word, Ollie? A less...
Well, he's going to provide the guacamole to Jake's salsa, spicy salsa.
I don't think he's necessarily pro Abe, but when we wanted to plan a show like this, we said we can't do it with just Jake because... Jake, you have a very, very, very strongly leaning opinion.
Well, I will. If he doesn't show up, I will try and become Thomas Baudinet in a different voice that sounds like John Oliver. No offense to you, Holly, and then correct myself. Okay.
So I think people listening to this know that Abe got assassinated and know that there's a bit of a scandal with some kind of church where there was some money donated to a party, and people might be aware that some cabinet ministers have now been resigning because of it. So, but before we get into this kind of murky territory, I wanted to ask a kind of preliminary question, which is I listened to a podcast by two British politicians called The Rest is Politics, and they find it remarkable especially given the discussion in the UK about how there's still a political class in the UK. You know, the fact that our current Prime Minister went to Winchester rather than Eton is seen as having diversified the intellectual pool from which our Prime Ministers are chosen, right? But they found it absolutely remarkable that Japan still has a very, very dominant political class. And you look at any Japanese politician, you go to their Wikipedia page, and all of their parents and cousins are clickable links to people that were cabinet ministers or politicians or whatever. Jake, can you just give us a bit of a background on quite how cozy Japan's political class is, and kind of talk a bit about Abe's lineage?
Well, Japan has, a long tradition of hereditary politicians. I mean, I think some of the early politicians were aristocrats, and there's just kind of this feeling that, if the father was an upstanding politician, that the son will also be an upstanding politician. So, people who establish themselves early in Japan's political dynasty tend to go on. And you also have to remember that the Liberal Democratic Party, which, as we all know, is neither liberal nor democratic, has basically ruled Japan since its inception in the 1950s. I mean, the only time they've ever been placed out of power was between 2009 2012 when the Democratic Party of Japan took over. So when you have we have basically a one-party democracy, and in that one-party democracy, fathers hand down political dynasties to their sons. Abe's grandfather, Kishi, was a war criminal, and he was let out of prison because the U.S. forces feared that Japan would go communist. He and Kodama Yoshio and some other war criminals, and together they formed Japan's Liberal Democratic Party. Abe's father was also a career politician, though he never became prime minister. And Abe is, the third of that political dynasty.
And what are his politics in very, very broad terms?
In very, very broad terms, Abe was very much raised by his grandfather. So Abe wanted to create a Japan that did not have the post-war constitution, which he considered a shackle on Japan, one without basic human rights, on pacifism, and popular sovereignty. And he wanted to restore a constitution where the emperor was a god, and also where Japan could wage war. I mean, that was his lifelong wet dream. Which he never came close to achieving, but that was always about Abe wanting to do. That was his obsession.
Right. But he was a very successful politician.
Well, he stayed in power as the prime minister for longer than anybody. I mean, if sitting in one place is a sign of being a great politician, then yeah, kudos to you, Abe. Well done.
So that's a very opinionated picture of Abe, who he was as a politician, who he was as a person. The instant that he was assassinated, we kind of saw all of this reaction in terms of what this is going to mean for the fabric of Japanese society. And one aspect that I especially wanted to talk about today, so many months later, is how little a lot of that came to bear. From where I'm sitting anyway, you saw a lot about, you're going to see all of this reaction to, you're going to see stricter laws in Japan. You're going to see anti-foreign sentiment. There were all of this stuff flying around in the zeitgeist immediately after. And I kind of feel like it has been this minor little ripple that is now mostly forgotten. I'm surprised at how quickly the assassination of Japan's prime minister kind of dropped off of everybody's radar. And I don't know, is that just me, or do you think that maybe in years past it would have been bigger?
I think that the reason that is, Bobby, is that the motivations of the assassin, Yamagami-san, and the reason that he did it struck a chord with the Japanese public that instead of being, I mean, he actually has fans. I mean, there are people signing petitions to ask for his sentence to be reduced.
Some people even are very honorific in the way they refer to him. I noticed just now we've been saying Abe, and you called him Yamagami-san. You reminded me of that that moment in the news the other day when somebody, what was it, the woman who said, "Chikan ga irashaimasu." She used like the super polite Japanese to discuss molesters on the subway.
Well, can I be my own counterpoint here? Because I'll say some nice things about Abe in my fake English accent.
Sure.
Okay. Abe Shinzo was a superb politician who brought Japan back from the brink of ruin with his policy of Abenomics, which made Japan a force again, which made the stock market rise. He showed a strong Japan to the world. He fought for the rights of Taiwan. He stood up against China, and he made Japan a force in world politics.
Who would have thought the English accent has so many plosives? It's going to be hard to edit.
Real quick, can I go on a tangent real quick since the idea of Sanzuke and Yobiste came up?
Yes.
So not too long ago, I had to be a part of like this interpretation job in Tokyo for a big company, and they had all sorts of kind of like leaders of the shachos, the company presidents of the foreign divisions, all come for a big conference. And just in moving conference venues, we all took a bus, and occasionally, one of the company employees or one of the leaders of the trip would point out different venues and say, let them know that this is where that is. Let them know that this is where that is. And we passed Budokan. And as we passed Budokan, they said, oh, that's where Abe's funeral was held. Can you tell them all that that's where Abe's funeral was held? And I started to. And as I started to, I got up to funeral for, and then I realized that it didn't pop into my head. The word prime minister, for some reason, didn't pop into my head.
Motoshusho, you'd say, right?
The former prime minister.
Yeah, Motosori.
No, I had to say this in English. So they said it to me in Japanese, and I had to say it in English. And prime minister didn't come up in English. I was like, Motosori Daijin, Motoshusho, how would you say that in English? And so that was kind of like mixed in with, but also I don't really have a whole lot of respect for this dude. So I just ended up saying the funeral for Abe. And the Yobiste that I did made every Japanese person on the bus start laughing at how awkward like the translation was. But all of the foreign visitors just understood that I had announced that that's where Abe's funeral was, and then all the Japanese people laughed.
but Jake, you're right about what you say about Abe being... I mean, Abe was a formidable politician in that he was very international. He was on the radar of the American presidents and the British prime ministers. He was a big presence in the G8. He definitely was an outward-looking prime minister. I mean, he was outward-looking according to you because he wanted to rip up the constitution so he could start shooting other countries. But I remember in my first year of university, which would have been 2010, the first cover of the first Economist I read was a picture of Abe in a Superman costume. And the Economist was praising Abenomics and his, pro-women approach, and there was obviously lots about him that was during his time in power very, very positive. What surprised me was
the feminist stuff. All after his death came pouring out of all the world leaders of all the countries as well.
But what surprised me was that even after he stopped, even after his time in office, he was still an active political presence. And something that surprised a lot of the foreign media was, what the hell was this guy doing standing outside a train station? Right? Why would he allow himself to get shot like that?
Oh, because that's what politicians do. I mean, the LDP is a machine. His job is to drum up support for the candidates in the upper house election. And, for Abe, that was a big deal because if there was enough, if the LDP won enough votes in the upper house election, then, his dream of passing constitutional reform is that much closer to actually becoming reality. So he was gung-ho about it.
Okay.
And I think that his death came before the election, so that gave them a kick. It was good for the LDP. They got just enough votes that they could probably, if they really tried to ramrod through a constitutional reform bill. But unfortunately, at the same time, the reasons that Abe were assassinated has done so much damage to the party that I think that they've gotten cold feet about doing anything radical.
Okay. Yeah, let's start to get into the reasons if we can, because I remember one of my earliest thoughts when just the news came out that he was assassinated was, please, dear God, let it not be a foreign national. Please, dear God, let it not be someone batshit crazy.
Well, that was the first thing that was rumored, right? Oh, it was clearly a Korean. It was clearly a Zainichi. It was clearly even when it was identified as there was videos of someone who looked Japanese. People were like, it couldn't possibly be.
Let's take a real quick 5-minute interlude for Ali to explain the visual differences between Japanese people and Korean people.
Ouch, Bobby.
So, Jake, who was this Korean fella?
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, let's put people who don't remember what happened, just the bare facts. So it was July 8th, right around lunch, near Nara. Like Nara is, a beautiful place, but not exactly a center of radicalism, right? It's a very sleepy temple town, once the capital of Japan. Somewhere between 11:30 and 12, Abe was shot to death while making a speech by this man named Tatsuya Yamagami, with a handmade gun, which was pretty amazing. Amazing that the gun worked.
So that's how we know he's Japanese, because Nihonjin wa monotsukuri jozu.
Yeah. Because no foreigner could have made a gun like this out of spare parts. It's clearly Japanese ingenuity and skill with tiny hands and tiny things to make a powerful weapon. But basically, Abe was shot at 11:30. He was probably dead immediately because there was two shots. So they capture this guy, Tatsuya Yamagami. Do you remember where you were when it happened? It's not a John F. Kennedy kind of thing, but where we were.
Yeah, that's how we measure major events in history, if we remember where we were when they happened.
Well, I never thought I'd need to remember where I was, because I didn't think I was in the running as a suspect. I didn't think I'd need an alibi that badly.
I was in Hokkaido going to private detective school. I was about to, for this podcast I'm working on, and I was about to go back to the school, and it was in a hotel room with my girlfriend, and scrolling through my phone when I saw the first glimpse, and I thought, holy moly, I'm in Hokkaido. There's no way I can get to Nara. So I did two things. I immediately, sent a heads up to the Daily Beast, who I write for, and then I called my daughter, who was interning with me for the summer, and I'm like, get your friend Himari, and grab your note bags, and grab my business cards, and be on a Shinkansen to Nara in 30 minutes. So that was, moments of great parenting. Like, go to the scene of the crime. Take some photos. Talk to the police. Get back to me. I'll be writing on the article. That was where I was, and that was what I was doing. But I wasn't surprised that he was shot. I can't tell you because, I think people forget. People have tried to kill Abe before.
Right.
In 2000, a bunch of disgruntled Yakuza firebombed his offices because allegedly he had paid them to defame a political opponent and then not give them the full amount.
Right.
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I remember a lot of foreign media going, it's just so surprising. Japan, a country of peace. If Japanese people want to settle an argument, they will make an origami crane, and whichever is the prettiest, that's who wins. But this is nonsense, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I had a joke that I did about that exact same thing, where I always talk to my mom back home about how I don't want to move back to America because of the gun violence. And anytime there's an incident, comes up in the conversation with my mom. And as soon as she heard that Abe was assassinated, I got a call, and she was like, oh, they're shooting their leaders over there. They're shooting their leaders. When are you coming home? I was like, I'll come home when we start shooting ours.
Yeah, exactly. And also, if your mum's worried about, she's obviously worried about her grandchildren, right? You need to let her know that your daughters are girls. They will not become political leaders. So
good point.
So it wasn't surprising that someone tried to kill him. Was this particular motivation surprising?
Yes. The motivation, right? When it first came out, because the police sort of released information that suggested that the person who killed Abe killed him because of his relationships to a cult, but they wouldn't name the cult, which was very bizarre.
For a long time, they called them a specific religious organization, right? Tokute.
Right, Shukyo Hojin, right? And I thought it could be Soka Gakkai because Soka Gakkai is a sort of Buddhist sect that many people consider a cult that's closely aligned with the LDP.
There's a lot of money raising for the LDP, right?
Yeah. And Komeito is their political partner. They really need them to get things done in the parliament. But then it slowly came out, and I don't remember. I think it wasn't the foreign press that did it first. It was some of the alternative media that was like, He says that he assassinated Abe because of Abe's links to the Unification Church. And I immediately thought, oh, well, that's true, because I have a really good memory for these things. There's a terrible tabloid called, well, it's not a terrible tabloid. I mean, sometimes they have good stuff called Kamino Bakudan, which means basically paper bomb. And they were writing about the connections between Abe and his family in the Unification Church back in 2015. So I was like, oh, well, there's probably some truth to that, but does that make Yamagami-san? I'm doing it again. I'm calling him Yamagami-san.
The Honorable Yamagami.
I'm going to have to call Abe-san. So anyway, it turns out that Yamagami-san had sent a letter to a journalist that he'd been corresponding with, in which he explained exactly why he assassinated Abe. And I read the letter, and I had a tough time convincing the Daily Beast to actually let me finally write an article about this whole phenomenon. But the letter was, like, I don't really have a personal problem with Abe, but the fact is that he is, and his family have been very closely connected to the Unification Church, which is a money-grubbing cult that destroyed my family's life and my life.
Can you just dig in a little bit deeper on that? It was to do with his mother, was it not, giving away all of the family's money?
So Yamagami's here, and I'm dropping this on, right? Okay, Yamagami's family, when he was young, his father died early. His mother joined the Unification Church. She gave all the money that the family had to the Unification Church, to the point where she was neglecting to take care of him and his brother. His brother also had cancer and lost an eye because of the treatment for the cancer. So, all the family money went to take care of, to the Unification Church instead of taking care of him and his brother. His uncle, who did a very good interview with a couple magazines, who I talked to on the phone once very briefly, basically, was looking after the kids. He wasn't able to go to college because there were no funds for him to go to college, because it all went to the Unification Church, even though he was an exceptionally bright student. He joined the self-defense forces to gain enough money to go to college, and then he took out an insurance policy on himself and killed himself and left his brother as the person who would have inherited. He tried to kill himself, and he failed to do that. And so, the guy had a very tragic life, and he became kind of obsessed with the Unification Church as the cause of that. So realizing
sorry to stop you again, but I think a lot of listeners won't really understand what I don't know what the Unification Church actually is. What motivated his mother to give all this money up?
Okay, the Unification Church, and I'm really simplifying this, is a church started in South Korea by Reverend Sung Young Moon.
So it was the Koreans after all.
Yes, it was the Koreans after all. Well, that also explains, and we'll go into this on why there was so much antipathy towards the Liberal Democratic Party now, and why there is so much antipathy towards Abe.
This is the same church that had a moment of global fame for their mass marriage ceremonies, right?
Right. The church would pick your marriage partner and then pair you off with people they thought you should marry.
I remember this from when I was a kid, from when I was in elementary school.
And since it was founded by Reverend Sung Young Moon, they called them the Moonies, right?
Yeah.
Very clever.
Right.
Yeah.
But part of their teaching was that Moon was the original Messiah, and that he was unique, that God had chosen him to spread the true Christianity on earth, and that in the lifetime, that he would lead people to a new world, a new second coming kind of thing. That was always very vague.
So it was Christian, ostensibly.
It is ostensibly a Christian religion, except they have their own Bible, their own interpretations of the Bible.
And the assassin's mother would regularly go to some place, some church.
Yeah, they have churches. They collect donations.
Right.
They have a lot of teachings. Now, one of the things that got them in trouble is in Japan, they sort of customized their money collection techniques to the Japanese psyche, which is a lot of Japanese people believe that your ancestors, after they die, are sort of, in the afterlife. Maybe they're in heaven, or maybe they're in hell, or maybe they're not reborn. It's not a permanent place. So
right.
This they did this kind of spiritual selling thing where they would approach people and say, your grandfather is burning in hell, but if you donate money to the church, we'll pray hard to get him out of it. Now that idea that your relatives might be suffering in the afterlife and need your help is part of the Japanese psyche. So it was a kind of clever move to get people to donate money. Or the classic, you're having bad luck because you're a sinner, and if you pray to give money to the church, will relieve you from the bad luck. But lots of approaches, and they're very famous for taking so much money from their believers that they would drive them into bankruptcy.
Sure. Okay, so pretty predatory stuff, pretty nasty stuff.
Yeah.
And why hasn't this been stopped?
Well, there was a time, especially after the Aum Shinrikyo. Remember those crazy loving neo-Buddhist cult people that put nerve gas on the subways?
Yeah, the sarin gas attack in 1995?
1995. It's in 1995. People began looking at the Unification Church and their practices, and there was a crackdown, and there were, I think there were some arrests and there were some prosecutions.
And just to be clear, the Unification Church wasn't linked to Aum Shinrikyo, but Aum Shinrikyo and Unification Church were kind of seen on the same level as predatory cults or cults with negative influences.
And the Unification Church, realizing that they were in a precarious position, began wining and dining and courting the favor of Liberal Democratic Party politicians. And it just so happens that Abe's grandfather, Kishi, was very close to the head of the Unification Church. The Unification Church was staunchly anti-communist. And so Abe and the head of the Unification Church had political ties. And Abe's father had ties to the Unification
Presumably
Church.
the church was donating money, were they?
Oh, they were. Not only did the church donate money, the church donated manpower. So if you tacitly agreed to sort of support the church's policies, and keep the police off their back, that was never written out. Then not only did they collect money for you, but they would send people to your offices to man the phones to get out the vote. They provided political secretaries to some politicians.
This is horrible, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's horrible. And the other thing, it's just like Soka Gakkai is, you have a group of fanatics, and they'll definitely make sure that if they're supporting this candidate, that all their friends and that each member votes for that candidate. And in places where election turnout can be as low as 32% or 52%, that can be enough edge to put you over the top. Yep. So manpower, votes, money. And that alliance between the Liberal Democratic Party and the Unification Church goes back to the 90s. And of course, it's coming out now that there were certain politicians, including people at the National Police Agency, who basically seem to have made a backdoor deal with the Unification Church to make the police not arrest them or not look into them as for fraudulent as a fraudulent predatory group.
Okay. Wow.
So the assassination and the motivations behind the assassination prompted this investigation into the Unification Church. And recently we've seen this raise larger issues in general about not only these kinds of organizations, but freedom of religion in Japan overall. How does this tie into threats to freedom of religion in Japan?
Wow, we're really elevating the level of this show today. Okay, the question is, okay, so let's say the Unification Church is allegedly a predatory religious group, but yet people of their own free will choose to join this group. Now, because it has been such a political epoxy upon the LDP, they are investigating the group to see whether they should have their religious status revoked or not. If a religious group in Japan engages in what is a pattern of predatory or antisocial behavior, they can have their religious license taken away from them. Mm-hmm. In which case, then they lose their tax status. It's not like they're banned. It's not like they can't do business in Japan, but it becomes very hard for them to survive or make any money.
Right.
Because everything they do is taxed. I'm going to take us off of the side a little bit, but that's another part of the scandal that's come up is the Unification Church isn't called the Unification Church in Japan anymore. It has this very long name that's something like the Family Values Group or something. I'll have to look it up because I can never remember it. It's so long. And part of that happened, they were, there was huge resistance to allowing them to change their name because everybody knew that the Unification Church was people to be wary of.
Right.
But the Ministry of Culture allowed them to change their names. And allegedly, Shimomura, who was the Minister of Education at the time, and one of Abe's close friends, engineered that changing of the name and made it happen
as a rebranding.
As a rebranding, it allowed them to rebrand because he was also, basically on the taking money from the Unification Church. So, he helped them tremendously by letting them rebrand. So there was a new generation of suckers who didn't know who they were. Mm-hmm. But you could argue, okay, if we look at the Unification Church and its behavior, and it's not clear, did they really violate Japanese criminal laws? There's some argue that they do, especially this group of lawyers that's been dealing with them for years. What about the next group? Will there be other political groups that maybe because they're too left-wing or for other reasons that are targeted, stripped of their religious status? I mean, I actually feel that in this case, it's so bad, and the history of exploitative practices and the amount of money they make their members cough up is so beyond acceptable norms that I think that it's not like the exception that's going to prove the rule. I think it's a very unique case. That's just my opinion.
And how much did Abe know about all this, and how much his party benefited from the church?
Abe knew about it very much. I mean, he spoke at, ironically, like I think last year, he spoke at a huge televised conference they had that had the leaders there. Donald Trump also made an appearance. He had been warned by the Lawyers Association that was dealing with the Unification Church not to be offering these people their support, not to actively be seeking their favor. And and revelations have come out within the party itself that, if you wanted this, if you were a candidate facing a tough battle, and you needed that liberal, and you needed the Unification Church, if you needed the Moonies on your side to push you over the top, that you had to go to Abe, and that Abe would allot those votes. So Abe was kind of like the conduit to the Unification Church, and as all these things came out, that's why at first the idea of having a national funeral for Abe, which was paid entirely by the state, I think most people were in favor of it. But as the revelations kept coming, by the time they actually held the funeral, which costs a huge amount of money, I think it cost more than Queen Elizabeth's funeral. Rest in peace.
Yeah, there were a lot of really funny takes going around about how it was a fitting way to send Abe off, how much he would have enjoyed wasting all the taxpayer money.
Well, that's true. He probably would have loved it. It was like it was the Tokyo Olympics of funerals, right? The initial cost would be like like $12 million or $2 million, and it ballooned to $12 million or $17 million. It's a huge amount of money because of the security and stuff.
And not only the money and the security, but also because the Tokyo Olympics also didn't have any foreign spectators.
I think. Wait, no. There were some prime diplomats at Abe's funeral. Nicolas Sarkozy, the greatest prime minister that France ever had, he was there.
Sarkozy.
Oh
yeah. Well, that's nice.
Jake gave it the Jewish pronunciation.
Gotcha. So, haven't you just been in France?
I was just in France.
Oh, did it go well?
It did go well. The Tokyo Vice. Wow, I sound like I'm promoting my TV show.
Do it.
Tokyo Vice premiered on Canal Plus, the France's answer to HBO, and I got to go there for the premiere and do all the interviews. I mean, they would have sure preferred Ansel Elgort or Michael Mann, but
right.
Nice.
I'm the only one who's available. So there you are.
Very nice. So basically, what I mean, you never thought that Abe was going to have a good legacy, right? But because of the way that he was killed, it's put a bit of a spotlight on this particular grubby part of his party. Now, you might argue that there's loads of problems with the LDP. I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? What when all this dust settles, and it seems like we're now 3 months after the assassination, do you think this is going to have long-term effects on the LDP, or is this just another LDP scandal?
Well, it's going to have long-term effects, and I'm going to put this in crude terms because this is sort of bandied about in the press, but it really sort of explains why people are so angry. Okay, so first of all, Abe and the LDP have made a lot of bank. They've gained a lot of votes by dog whistling about anti-Korean sentiment, like the Zainichi, or sort of the Jews of Japan, that they're controlling the economy, or that Korea is disrespecting Japan. I mean, they've harnessed that anti-Korean sentiment to gain votes for years and years. So when it turns out that actually they're getting marching orders from a South Korean cult, that looks really bad. But then someone unearthed in the writings of Reverend Sung Young Moon, he said, in God's plan, basically, Korea is God's penis and Japan is God's vagina. And, it's the job of the penis to penetrate the vagina for world harmony. I mean, literally, that's what it says.
I remember seeing this.
And listen, being told you're a pussy by a South Korean cult leader and knowing that, your leader, that Abe was saying, please have your way with us, that just goes over very badly with the Japanese people.
Yeah. So we've got the investigation into the Unification Church. We've got, I think, people being a little bit more aware of kind of the way in which these organizations exert influence on politics. But at the same time, we also have kind of like Soka Gakkai affiliated politicians standing up and saying, we don't want this to go too far and affect other religious organizations. Do you think that they're mostly concerned about avoiding political finance reform, or that they're concerned about religious freedom?
I really think they're concerned about that once you take a look at the practices of one religious group and their alliances with political parties, that their own group might be in danger. And I also think that there are a lot of ties between the Liberal Democratic Party and other religious groups, including like the National Association of Shinto Shrines. You could argue that Nippon Kaigi is actually a Shinto cult.
Buddhist and Shinto religious affiliations in Japanese governance goes back forever. I mean, that's a very strong Japanese tradition.
Right, but if you're going to argue that is, not kosher, so to speak, then you have, then the problems don't stop. I'm sure that the LDP is dreading someone like dredging up accusations about Ikeda, who's the founder of Soka Gakkai, and Soka Gakkai's sketchy pats, right?
Right.
It's a bad one for them. You want your politicians to be thinking of the national good rather than the religious cults that are feeding them money, right?
And you also want your religions to not be predatory.
Yes, you want your religions not to be predatory. To contributing to the greater good, right? To be teaching morals or contributing to society rather than seeing how much money they can suck up from their believers.
So that's obviously what this assassin was thinking, right? And I could totally empathize if you thought that your mum was part of a cult and had given away all the family money and caused all this destitution in your family. You'd be livid. Do we know anything about what else he did? Was murdering Abe like his first port of call?
Well, his own letter says, I thought about. His own letter explains his motives, eloquently. So I'll just quote him. He's basically saying, "I've seen so many people suffer because of this church, and the only way to prevent more people from suffering the same fate that I had is to call attention to the political ties between the church and the ruling party.
Yep.
And then all the other misdeeds of the church will come to light. I would have preferred to assassinate the current leader of the group, but since she is not coming to Japan anytime soon, Abe is the best choice." And
right.
Because he was clearly I wouldn't say he was suicidal, but he clearly did this with the awareness that there's a good chance that he would be shot or that he would be killed doing it, that he sort of
not by Abe's security guards.
Well, not by Abe's security
They just watched on gormlessly going, "Oh my God, that's the sound of an explosion. That's cool."
Pretty
Fireworks,
much, but fireworks.
They were useless.
Yeah,
if you watch the video, by the way, there's two guys clearly dressed in suits with anti-bullet briefcases who do just watch absolutely gormlessly.
Well, I have the feeling that if I was Abe's security guard, I might feel the same way if I had to spend weeks and weeks with him. But
sure.
But nevertheless, yeah, they do look really bad. But one of the reasons, and that Yamagami has gotten support is he taps into this kind of Japanese love of the nobility of failure, right? I mean, he's kind of basically he's like a kamikaze pilot that actually succeeded in his mission.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm gonna risk my life to save other people from falling pray to this church, and I don't care if I live or die. And the way to do that is to take out Abe. I'm sorry. Like, I don't have anything against personal, but you are, in bed with them, and taking you out brings national attention to this.
But he wasn't. I guess the question I'm asking, he wasn't like blogging about this. He wasn't writing pamphlets. He wasn't already an activist. This wasn't already on the radar of the security services.
No. He had written a letter years before, and he wrote a letter a week before, or actually a couple days before he assassinated Abe. And he explained his reasons. That's why we have the letter. He wrote it to a journalist he'd been corresponding with before. But he's, he's
and the journalist didn't tip the police off.
No, I don't think so. I think the journalist wasn't even really aware of what the contents of the letter were until, Abe was assassinated.
Right.
Then he, gave it to the police, and then he put it up in the public domain.
Yeah. What you seem to be saying is, you're obviously not condoning murdering someone, but
no,
if you take into account what this guy's goals were and what he's achieved, he might, on his own terms, have been successful.
Yes, no, he has been completely successful in doing what he set out to do. That's not saying that killing Abe was justified. I don't like Abe Shinzo, and I think he was a terrible person, but I don't think he deserved to be shot to death.
Sure.
But
how would you have assassinated him then?
Jake would have done what he's done his entire career and assassinated his character with the written word.
Assassinate his character. But if I was really desperate, I would have probably shown up at his house considering his stomach condition, with 3 buckets of Popeye's fried chicken,
right,
hot, spicy Cajun recipe.
Yeah,
and some biscuits to finish him off.
Right. But, those ulcers were going to be.
But that would be his choice, to eat the chicken or not eat the chicken. I would never force him to eat the chicken.
No.
Okay, so what's currently going on? I've seen in the news that like some people are trying to distance themselves from the LDP, some cabinet politicians. That's all I really know. Jake, can you tell us the facts?
One of his big right-hand men, Yamagiwa-san, I put a san there, who was supposed to be, Minister of Economic Revitalization, had such deep ties with the Unification Church, including this photo op of him and the leader taken together, that he basically had to resign in disgrace. And Kishida kind of resisted getting rid of this guy because he's a good politician. He knows what he's doing, and he waited too long. So he's replaced him with a guy who's kind of a financial genius. I wish I could remember his name, who will probably do good things with Japan's economic policy. But it has been too little too late. And meanwhile, the LDP was supposed to do an internal investigation of who in their party was close to the Unification Church and uncover those ties and, make some kind of bold move, which they failed to do. Of course, the internal investigation was incredibly flawed. And as soon as the results were announced, the media found example of more ties between the LDP and the Unification Church that were not uncovered or were not mentioned. So, Kishida's support rating right now is about 26%, and that is worse than Suga's was when he was forced to resign. I mean, I didn't think he would ever. I think you could top Suga in being disliked and dysfunctional, but Kishida's done an amazing job. He's really handled this poorly.
Liz Truss is looking at those numbers so jealously, going, "I'd love to have 20% approval."
Can I ask you? I watched on some British TV show that said she started with negative approval. Can that is possible? Can you start with a minus approval?
No, I don't. I don't think she did start with negative approval. That's nonsense. She started, believe it or not, because this country is so absolutely insane, genuinely persuading people that she was a fresh start, despite the fact that she'd been in this government, this government has been in power for the last decade or more, and she's been a cabinet politician. She persuaded people that she was a fresh start. And I called it, not on this podcast, but on the Lost in America podcast, I called it that she was not going to last because she is completely intellectually non-credible. And she's really, really good at like photo shoots. She's really good at looking like a politician, as cosplaying as Maggie Thatcher. But as one commentator described her, she looks at policy like a pigeon would look at a Rubik's Cube. Just absolutely dead behind the eyes, vacuous, nothing going on. And when she was confronted with the cold, hard reality of actually doing a job and not just posing, But no, and she's gone. Someone on Twitter said it's funny that she was the person that ended up giving the speech at the Queen's funeral. It's like when you have pictures of an ex at a wedding who you only dated for a few months. It's like, oh, they're there. The Prime Minister will remember it from this period is Boris Johnson or possibly even Sunak. How are the Japanese pronouncing Sunak? Sunak or Sunak?
They've elongated the su, I've seen.
Wow, I was hoping they would pronounce it like snaku.
Yeah, exactly.
That would be really funny. But missed opportunity.
That would make sense because he was known as Dishi Rishi when he was the Chancellor. Anyway, we're digressing. But no, I mean the Liz Truss had absolutely terrible approval ratings. But don't forget, in the UK, it doesn't matter. All that matters is whether the people in your party like you. And so the fact that nationally she had poor approval is irrelevant.
There's a tremendous parallel to the LDP there as well. I mean, they keep electing people amongst themselves who are not particularly popular, but it doesn't matter because they are the ruling party.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And the Tory party is basically two parties in one, right? It's the kind of centre moderately progressive on some social issues, such as gay marriage, but generally, wanting a smaller state, wanting to lower government expenditure, wanting to lower taxes. And then you've got the far right of the party, which is indistinguishable from the UK International Party or the British National Party, which is close the borders. If you look brown, we'd rather you weren't about. And Rishi Sunak has already proven that in his cabinet appointments that he's looking to still straddle all sides of the party. He's put in some progressives in his cabinet, but he's also got the likes of Suella Braverman as his Home Secretary, who said that she had a wet dream of seeing a newspaper which had a plane sending asylum seekers back to Rwanda. But
oh wow,
yeah, well,
okay, you're starting to make Japanese politics look good. Thanks, Ali.
Oh well, my
pleasure.
Well, so what? Well, let's try and draw that parallel because basically the Conservative Party have had a run now for over a decade. About 12 years. They've basically cycled through all the talent. They haven't managed to nurture new talent. And the pollsters are basically saying they will almost certainly lose their massive majority, probably lose a general election to the Labour Party. Now, Japan doesn't really have an alternative at the moment, does it? The LDP are going to cling on for a long time to come.
Yeah, there's no alternative. We're stuck in this one-party democracy for years to come. Think how many years it took for there to be an actual change in government. I mean, and that lasted 2 or 3 years. I think, unfortunately, they got handed the disaster in Tohoku and the nuclear meltdown and got blamed for it.
Right.
But I think this whole unification church scandal has hurt them badly. Abenomics was always a stupid idea. And as we're looking at the yen drop to 150 yen to the dollar, I think that tells you the rest of the world has realized that as well. The Japanese economy is in tough shape. People are rightly blaming the Liberal Democratic Party. So the repercussions of Abe's assassination have been huge.
So he's not dying a martyr?
Yeah, he's definitely not being considered a martyr because he wasn't killed for political reasons. He was killed because he was chumming up to what everybody in Japan, whether they say it or not, regards as bad guys, right? Abe was chumming up with the bad guys and somebody took him out. That's tough. But he wasn't killed because of his politics. He was killed because of political bedfellows. In a way, it's kind of like, after all the crooked stuff he did, you'd kind of like to have seen him face justice, but no, he's taken out for just another one of his sort of corrupt crony relationships that he had to stay in office. I mean, Abe would shake hands with the devil if it would have kept him in power, but eventually that caught up with him.
Okay, and then final question is, what's happened to the assassin?
He is still under psychiatric review, right? Because I really think the Japanese government does not want this guy to face trial and actually explain why he did the things he did. Right? That's not going to be good for anybody. I think that somewhere the halls of power, they're going let's just say he's crazy and put him away, and it's okay if he doesn't do time, because if you give him a forum to speak and he's not a stupid person and he explains why he did it, every day that trial's going on is going to be political damage for the LDP. It's going to be a reminder that his reasons for doing this were related to, a relationship between the LDP and a very hated cult, the LDP would like to forget about.
Wow.
So I'm guessing they're going to find him insane, and then he'll never really see a trial. But you never know.
And then what will that mean for him personally? Does he get locked up?
He gets locked up for like a psychiatric evaluation or until they deem him sane. So he'll probably get out at some time. Even if let's say they decide he's sane, they put him on trial, he's not going to get the death penalty because there's an unwritten rule in Japan is you have to kill more than one person to get the death penalty.
Interesting. Okay.
So that would probably mean that they give him, he's definitely not going to be found innocent. The judge might give him muki choeki, which basically means 20 years in prison, maybe 30 years in prison.
Yeah, I mean, he can't be found innocent, right? Because he's admitted to it.
He can't be found innocent. I mean, everybody saw him. It's all on film.
Yeah.
Now, if a psychiatrist says he is, has diminished responsibility or diminished capacity, he could get a reduced sentence.
Right.
The petition to get him a reduced sentence, or clemency is never going to happen. But public opinion is so important. I mean, judges are also conscious of public opinion, right? So I don't think anyone's going to throw the book at him. I don't think they're going to give him. He's definitely not going to get the death penalty. The question is, does he get 15 years? Does he get 20 years?
Wow.
Does the judge determine, okay, this guy actually has a chance of reform? Is he sorry for what he did? He's going to have to say, I'm very sorry. Even though I had these reasons, I'm terribly sorry.
This is fascinating.
Yeah, so I've gotten real quiet around this whole section for the same reason that I initially was kind of like not super excited about doing this whole topic as a show, just because I understand very much the idea that public sentiment could be in this guy's favor. And again, I don't condone violence. I don't like. I want to make clear that this is 100% a joke. I don't think that what happened to Abe was acceptable. But if you would ask me at the same time, well, what about the same thing happening, but on a grander scale to all of the world leaders simultaneously, I would be like, well, that might not be a bad idea. Like, we're in a generation where there are no penalties for corruption, especially as an American. There's no consequences for corruption. And at a time in our global our life as a planet where leaders not representing the interests of the people and not taking drastic steps to save the planet, I think are responsible for the future death of generations.
Yeah.
And I think there should be consequences for that, and there aren't.
All right. Yeah.
Well,
wow.
I'll have to say, okay, I am a Zen Buddhist priest, but I'm really, really, really low ranking, and I keep getting in trouble because I'm like not able to fold my robes correctly and other things. I really need to grade up on that point. But sometimes I have doubts. Is like, is there really a cosmic law to the universe? Is there really karma? And when Abe was assassinated, though I don't believe that he deserved a violent death, I was like, well, maybe there is karma. Maybe we all do get what we deserve in the end.
Yeah,
so
passed through my head.
Are we basically suggesting that this might have some kind of chilling effect on politicians? The more that there's public opinion saying, actually, Abe, no one deserves to be shot to death, but all these justifications make sense. Do you think other politicians are going to be thinking, well, either I've got to be less corrupt or I better hire better security?
Yeah, I think they're thinking both. I better be less corrupt and better hire better security. Yeah. That's definitely what I'm thinking. If I was going to invest in Japan right now, which nobody is doing, I would be investing in local security companies, man, because they're going to be doing a lot of business.
Yeah. Jake, thanks so much for taking the time to be. I'd say, Bobby, you might agree with me, surprisingly balanced.
Yeah,
I thought this was going to be. Well done, Jake. Pat on the back.
I tapped into my inner Harris, in my Tobias Harris, and I tried to do as best I could.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a special episode of Japan by River Cruise. We hope to be back with some regular episodes. We've got some fairly interesting guests that we've approached that might come through in the coming months. If you are new to the show and this is the first time you've heard us talk, then you can see all of our previous episodes, of which there are more than 100, at japanbyrivercruise.com. Thank you also to everyone who continues to support us through Buy Me a Coffee. We are genuinely grateful. We haven't forgotten how special you are to us. No extras for this week's show with our guests. We might try to provide that bit of guac to Jake Salsa by doing a special interview with Thomas Baldenet, who has some thoughts. That might well be on the extras feed. So if you're a subscriber to that, then please do check that out. All of the details are at buymeacoffee.com/Japan by River Cruise.
Thank you so much for joining us, Jake. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I'll look forward to picking up Tokyo Private Eye.
Thanks, Bobby. All right, see you guys. Johnny.
Bye.